Hello, and thank you for joining us today during this webinar. It is in support of the World Compassionate Communities Day, which is happening for the first time this year. And we're hosting this webinar because the Compassionate Communities movement is about supporting anyone who's experiencing serious illness, caregiving, dying, and grief, which we believe is everyone's responsibility. And so therefore we will be hosting this webinar today with you and covering the culture of compassion in workplaces within Canada. And just wanted to mention that this webinar is brought to you by the Palliative Care ECHO Project. Just a little bit about the Palliative Care ECHO Project. It is a 5-year national initiative to cultivate communities of practice and establish continuous professional development among healthcare providers across Canada who care for patients with life-limiting illness. If you'd like to learn more, please visit the link provided on the screen. We also just wanted to thank Health Canada for supporting the Palliative Care ECHO Project. So just some quick introductions. So my name is Tompkins. I work at Pallium Canada, and I'm the National Compassionate Communities Lead, and I will be co-presenting this webinar today with Laurel Gillespie, who is the CEO of the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association. Just a few welcome and housekeeping pieces. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're from and why you're here today. Your microphone is muted, but there will be time for question and answers at the end of this webinar. And we'll just have you use that question and answer function. But feel free to use the chat function if you are having any technical issues or you'd like to leave a comment. This session is being recorded and will be emailed to everybody who registered within the next week. All right, let's start to dive into the session. So the objectives of this webinar today is really to help understand why the workplace is a key stakeholder in the compassionate communities movement. As we sort of mentioned earlier, we really do believe it's everybody's responsibility. And the next objective is understand why it's important to create a care culture in the workplace. And then we'll move on to learning about 2 Canadian resources that exist in Canada and can support workplaces in building a more caring and compassionate culture. Okay, let's have a look at workplaces as a key stakeholder in a compassionate community. So first, let's look at the impact on our life. Workplaces have a large impact on our life and really our health as well. So when we think about it, adults spend 1/3 of their life working and another 1/3 of their life sleeping. So it's a pretty big percentage of time that we engage in our workplaces. Also, workplaces provide us with substantial financial sustainability, right? So we're working to make money to be able to provide for ourselves and our family. Workplaces also increase our sense of connections with others. It's well documented and noted that workplaces, often colleagues build strong connection. And in fact, workplaces are and often can be another community for that employee. So that sense of connection and getting to see your colleagues is really important for our health. And then the last piece is it provides a sense of purpose. I personally will say that is very accurate for myself. You know, I love the work that I do at Pallium, and I have a sense of purpose and pride with that work. And so again, that would contribute to my health. So we just wanted to put a question out there for you to sort of kick off this webinar, and we would love if you could put your thoughts in the chat. So just imagine you are an employee who is caregiving and you feel that you're struggling managing your work. So you don't feel like you're keeping up with your workload, or maybe you don't feel you're performing to the same level that you would normally be performing. What might some of the fears be that would keep you awake at night? So if you could share some thoughts in the chat, that would be really great. getting fired, someone said. Yes, absolutely. Probably top of the list. Anyone else? What are some of those fears? Yeah, burning out. We certainly have heard that a lot, I think, during the pandemic. Disappointing others, 100%. Not being able to pull my weight. Woo, all the ideas are flowing in, which is really great. Let's see what else. Making a mistake. Absolutely. Losing my support network, 100%, because many of us, you know, we engage with our colleagues even outside the workplace. So 100%. Not fulfilling my personal expectations. Absolutely. We all have our own goals that we're always trying to live up to. Doing substandard work, worrying about that. Disappointing others. Absolutely. So this is really great ideas, guys. And I think it's important to highlight this, that people who are working and then in these other roles of either caregiving or maybe they're experiencing grief, they have fears that keep them up at night. And that's really, you know, what this culture change is about, is limiting those fears that keep them up. All right, so now we're going to move on to why prioritize a care culture in the workplace. So first, we want to look at this from the perspective of an employee who is also providing care, who is caregiving. So research tells us that 35% of the Canadian workforce is also providing unpaid informal care when balancing job responsibilities. So that's that's a pretty good chunk of people who are maybe dealing with some of those fears that we've just talked about earlier. And then this one I thought was interesting as well, where 560,000 full-time employees, or the equivalent of full-time employees, leave the workplace every year. So that's whether an employee maybe drops down to part-time, or an employee just decides that it's best for them at this time to step out of their role altogether. So in total, that's how many full-time positions leave the workplace yearly. And then if we look at employees who are dealing with grief, which certainly I think has been a common conversation in this last year and a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so research again tells us that employees dealing with grief took an extra 30 workdays a year just to avoid coming back to work. And that research article talked about some of the barriers being, not feeling supported, that uncomfortable conversation. And so they just are choosing to try and avoid it for as long as they can. So again, this is another opportunity where a culture, a caring culture could support that employee who's grieving. So benefits of a stronger culture, there are many of them. And so, we see improved morale, we see increased employee retention, reduced absences, just speaking to the slide previously, improved workplace productivity. People, when they're at work, are going to be able to focus more, not necessarily worrying about other things outside. And then as well, just supporting the team when they need it the most. Laurel, did you have any additional thoughts on this slide?
I guess, no, I think Bonnie, like you've honed in on most of the pivotal pieces here, but overall, I think one of the biggest takeaways in this is that if employers don't begin to start to make this shift to become more compassionate and acknowledge that the needs of their employees have changed, they're going to be the ones who are going to lose those loyal, trusted employees first.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so now we're going to move on to showcasing those two resources that we mentioned at the beginning that can help workplaces who want to look at starting to create that care culture within their workplace. And I'm going to hand it over to Laurel.
Thank you, Bonnie. I wanted to begin on behalf of CHPCA, or the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, to begin this afternoon by acknowledging that I'm meeting on Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. And as settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet today and thankful for all the generations of people who've taken care of this land for thousands of years. Magawitch. I would welcome for any of you participating today to also acknowledge in the chat where you may be participating from today in the spirit of compassion and healing. So thanks to everyone for coming together today to learn about the Canadian Compassionate Companies and what we're doing to work as part of a broader enterprise in creating compassion and capacity around that for all of us. So as Bonnie mentioned, my name is Laurel Gillespie and I'm the CEO of Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association. But I did want to mention that World's Compassionate Communities Day, which is part of what spearheaded us doing this webinar, is led by Public Health Palliative Care International, which aims to sort of build on the momentum of the growing number of compassionate communities, projects, and programs, highlighting the work of members and member organizations such as Pallium and CHPCA around the globe and within Canada. And also to continue to mobilize and connect people through local compassionate actions related to dying, death, caregiving, and grief. I guess I have vacation on my mind. I just said Greece, right? Instead of grief. It's my COVID, my subconscious coming out about getting ready and looking forward to traveling maybe one day soon. But suffice to say that death, dying, loss, and care, it's everyone's responsibility and business, particularly when it comes to the landscape of Canadian employers, especially during these times of COVID and the things that we're learning. That Canadian compassionate communities and companies are those who support those experiencing end of life, grief, and caregiving. And we all know that it takes a village to raise a child, but the same is true when it comes to helping those who are nearing the end of their life or loved ones, and taking on a role such as caregiving for a loved one, especially those who are facing a life-limiting illness or supporting one with a life-limiting illness can cause ripple effects throughout our lives and of those of the lives around us. So compassionate companies and compassionate communities create social infrastructures that provide resources and additional supports to give us a sense of belonging when it can otherwise be so easy to feel isolated and alone and overwhelmed. So every single one of us as a human being has a stake in this, and the responsibility lies within each of us because we all face grief, loss, and death at some point in our lives. So how can we be sure to show up for those whom we work with, our second families, as I say, that I always try to promote within my own internal team that we are human beings first and we're professionals second. So if we don't acknowledge that, we're human first and grief and loss is a natural universal response to loss, we need to begin to shift our learning and our approach to how we interact with our colleagues, particularly in the workspace, and how we can honor and respect them as those who are grieving and experiencing loss. Next slide there, Bonnie, please. So about the CHPCA, we are the national voice for hospice palliative care in Canada, representing hospice programs across the country. We're a small team of about 10 of us, and we've been around. This is our 30th anniversary this year. But we, promote the World Health Organization's definition of palliative care, which is really an approach that aims to reduce suffering and improve quality of life for people who are living with life-limiting illness. And we do that through pain and symptom management, psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, practical support. So it's very much an interdisciplinary approach to care. But also it includes support for caregivers during the illness and after the death of the person, which is so, so, so important. Next slide. So a little bit of history on the Compassionate Care Benefits, CCB, and the evolution of how we came up with the Canadian Compassionate Company designation. So the Compassionate Care Benefits, as you know, was introduced by the federal government in 2004 and offered 6 weeks of benefits through the employment insurance program. And then just more recently, this past 6 months, Bill C-220, which is a private member's bill by an MP from Edmonton area, Matt Generou, called on the government to extend their grief and bereavement leave from 3 days to 10 days. And that was passed in May 12th, if I'm not mistaken, and then received royal assent the end of June. And by the end of this September, employees in Canada were to fall in line with the new legislation to ensure that when someone had someone that they lost, that they would be given that 10 days off as part of that grief and bereavement. So CHPCA was engaging with frontline workers in palliative care to encourage them to act as knowledge brokers to caregivers and patients to increase access to federally legislated CCB. And we're really excited that Matt Generou, the member of parliament, was reelected, and he'll be continuing on his front to expand those benefits even further. Next slide, please. So a joint survey in 2014 with Human Resources Professionals Association revealed that most HR professionals believed in some form of compassionate care for the employees, but there was a wide range and a lot of inconsistencies in what those policies looked like across the country. So in 2016, that legislation was changed from 6 weeks to 26 weeks, where your job would be secured. You could at least take some time off, knowing that your job would be there when you come back, if you were ready to at that point. And now under the Labor Code, there's an extension of 10 days past death as a result of the passing of Bill C-277. Next slide. So the origin of our Canadian Compassionate Company program, we have a Champions Council, which is a group of industry leaders who came together to increase the profile of hospice palliative care in corporate Canada. And out of that, they developed this Canadian Compassionate Companies program so that businesses could elect to apply to the program and be vetted. And it would encourage Canadian businesses to adopt CCC benefits, which was still not being widely accessed by employees. So the Canadian Compassionate Company was launched in 2016 with GlaxoSmithKline as our first company to achieve the designation. Next slide. So what is the designation? The vetting process for the designation and receiving it is such that the individual or the company would support individual caregivers within their organizations who are caring for a loved one, a family, or friend in the community, or in Canada in general. And it was the most tangible way to demonstrate that the employer really does care and lives up to the values of its policies. So organizations that do an exemplary job of providing the kind of benefits that help people go through that period of time when they are caregivers can now become designated as a Canadian Compassionate Company. So companies really need to hone in and recognize that employees may occasionally require more time off than is accommodated by regular leave policies. So what we do know is that grieving is a universal, natural human response to a sense of loss. But yet we all can recognize that we grieve individually and differently. And some of the things that we've learned is that when an employer increases the capacity and gives this safe space and creates a trusting environment for an individual to take the time they need to recover from a loss, a significant loss, that it's more beneficial for them to have these benefits up front. Otherwise, you end up sending somebody back to work maybe too early, or the employer and fellow employees don't know how to respond or to behave or to react. Hey, so-and-so's been off for X number of months caring for this person, and now they're back. What do I say to them around the water cooler? How do I act? What do I do? So all of this is intertwined, and more information is forthcoming about that as we build our capacity and learn and create these wonderful programs. So our CCC program recognizes the organizations that do have formal HR policies in place to accommodate the needs of their employees who may need to take time off work to care for a loved one, and even goes a little bit beyond the what if they're not ready to come back on a certain day at a set time and make gradual returns to work, etc. Next slide, Bonnie, please. So the criteria to become a Canadian Compassionate Company you really have to ask yourselves these questions. And if you answer yes to any of the 3 following questions, you can qualify for it. So I know on our end, it's quite, it may seem like a bit of an arduous process, but I think the message that's given back to your employees, your most valued resource in any organization is your human resources. But it really sends the message that you are valued, you're respected and honored through one of the most difficult times of your life. And I think in the long run, that's where employees are going to give themselves a competitive advantage, is when they have subscribed to this kind of policy around creating capacity around compassion for their employers. So I won't read them all to you, but I don't know if, hopefully it's big enough for you to read, but does your company association have an HR policy that endorses the CCB? Are your employees' jobs protected when they access it? Will they be able to come back and return to their job that they hopefully love and are happy to come back to? Do you have top-up benefits over and above? As I mentioned, like if you're not ready to come back on, day 12 of, the 12th month, that kind of thing. Is there flexible and supportive caregiver accommodation policy that, I can still meet my job requirements, but I may need to adjust my hours a little bit because I've got to care for mom, and, can I do some of my things when mom's gone to bed, for instance, using that as from lived experience, having done it twice over now. Does your company promote ACP using resources and tools available for advanced care planning, which is a whole other webinar all into of itself, advanced care planning, but can help to mitigate and reduce some of those questions that make caregiving challenging at times. Next slide. So some of the benefits to being a Canadian compassionate company is it strengthens your employee engagement. And here are just some numbers, because we all love our statistical data, is those companies engaged with engaged employees see 233% greater customer loyalty and a 26% greater annual increase over revenue. I mean, and these kinds of numbers speak volumes. And I think this comes down to the trust and loyalty that people have with their employers. You're less likely, we all know in the business world anyway, that that's one of your greatest expenses is turnover of your staff. So when you can provide that support, you will have broadened your trust and engagement with your employees, and that has a spin-off value effect to your broader community and other clientele. So we were, for the inaugural World Compassionate Communities Day, our CCCs were profiled throughout various social media and other media modalities. National Grief and Bereavement Day, including the Saying Goodbye concert, that's coming up just around the corner, and it is a free concert. We still have a few seats if you're in the National Capital Region for the NAC that you can sign up online and attend the concert in person. It's a hybrid event, just to give it a little bit of a plug. That'll be some stars are doing their music from a video performance, and others are live from an NAC. So we'd love to have you participate in that. Donations are gratefully accepted, but otherwise it's a free concert. In partnership with the Canadian Home Care Association, we have Caregiver Day, advanced care planning tools and resources. So kickstart the change in your organization. That 52% of employees report that the culture of their organization is not as supportive as it could be around the care progression of caregivers. So HBC has been looking at this for quite a while, and I think in the competitive market where we see there's a help wanted here and there, and it's really employers are struggling to find and maintain or retain top talent. This is going to be a shifting area where companies are going to have to go and really become more compassionate, but also live to those values. So be a leader in the work-life balance policies and practices. As I said, we're human beings first. We are professionals second. And it's really about how we care for each other. And your employer has the opportunity to really stand out and be a tall poppy as far as that's concerned in leading the way around that. Next slide, Bonnie. So I mentioned the advanced care planning as an integral part of this. So it's a great way to initialize cultural change in your organization. Every time you're doing, I was going to say like a performance evaluation, ask your team members, have you participated in advanced care planning? Are you familiar with what it is? Really encourage and engage, host a workshop. We have great universal workshops in a box where anyone can facilitate an advanced care planning workshop. Lunch and learns or webinars as example. And as I mentioned, so we just launched the universal toolkit in the box where anyone can host. You don't have to be an expert or subject matter expert in clinical settings to provide information about advanced care planning. And we have a plethora of resources that are available and downloadable online on our website. Next slide. So compassion belongs in our workplace culture. And according to the 2018 Statistics Canada survey, 1 in 4 Canadians aged 15 and older were providing care to a family member or friend with long-term health condition, physical or mental disability, or problems related to aging. Almost half reported they were caring for a parent or in-law. So I like to say that this is just a win-win-win situation to increase this capacity around compassion, to have yourselves become more knowledgeable around what you can do to show up, to provide the compassion and support that your people are needing. And it really is very reflective on the quality and type of company that you have when you do have these kinds of benefits, because it really shows that it's how we take care of each other that matters at the end of the day. Next slide. So for more information, or if anybody has any particular questions that they're not comfortable asking today, please feel free to reach out. My head of partnership and development is Kelly McLaren. Her email is there on the screen. I can be reached at the same, Gillespie@chpca.ca. And you can apply if you happen to be an employer. Become an employer of choice by acquiring your CCC designation. And with that, I'd like to just again thank Pallium and Bonnie for extending the invitation to come and speak to you about the CCC program and some of the things that we're working on developing together. And I see that there's a question here in the chat box. I'm just going to. So does the qualifications for CCC make it difficult for small businesses to receive this designation? They may be able to show those supports, but not be able to have the financial means to extend the time offer to top up. By all means, have a look at the application package. It's not an expensive process to go through. It's very reasonably priced. The benefits, you get the CCC logo designation that you can advertise and promote. But through the CCCB benefits, you'll find that those extensions with the legislation have changed significantly over the past few years, and fingers crossed that there's a lot more game to be played in this field. And I think that what you'll see in the next 5 to 10 years is just continued growth to support businesses of all kinds, whether they're small, medium, or large enterprises. So, but again, please feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to provide you with more information on that. I'll pass it over to you, Bonnie.
Thank you. We're passing the baton back and forth. Great. So now I'm going to speak about a resource that we have at Pallium Canada that also is designed to support that care culture in the workplace and sort of drive that change. And it's called the Compassionate Workplace Campaign. So I just wanted to take a little minute to share a bit of a background about Pallium Canada and the work that we do. So Pallium is a national not-for-profit organization that has been building palliative care capacity in the healthcare system and within communities since 2000 in both English and French. We are funded in part by Health Canada, by sponsored organizations, and through revenue generating through the sales of our products and resources. We are a national leader in palliative care and work closely with provinces, national stakeholders, federal partners to advance the key initiatives such as Canada's Framework for Palliative Care and the recent launch of the Action Plan. We equip healthcare organizations, healthcare professionals, and community, including businesses and workplaces, with the skills and knowledge to provide palliative care and compassionate support to every Canadian. And again, we're speaking today because that resonates with World Compassionate Communities Day. We believe that improving palliative care is everyone's business, not just responsibility of the healthcare system. We have a proven track record as a trusted partner, working collaboratively to help catalyze and drive system and organizational change where it's needed. So a little bit about how the Compassionate Workplace campaign was developed. So certainly, because we engage in the compassionate communities movement in Canada, we know and we were hearing that engaging the workplaces is a bit of a tough achievement for those on the ground driving compassionate community initiatives. And so we did a bit of research and did a massive lit review to see, is there a role where Pallium could help with this piece as well. And so thus far we did this big literature review to start to explore a resource. And once we completed that literature review, we engaged focus groups to basically just present our findings and get their feedback. And so we ran focus groups with employers as well as employees who were dealing with these lived experiences at the time. And so what was really interesting that we heard during the focus groups was, and as Laurel just mentioned, employees saying they're just a number, they don't feel supported, that sort of comments. But then interestingly enough, we were hearing from employers was the idea that I really want to help these employees, but I'm super nervous I'm going to say or do the wrong thing. So what we started to see is it wasn't necessarily a case of employers weren't helping because they just couldn't or didn't want to. It was a case that employers sometimes were not helping because they just weren't sure what they could do, or they were afraid of saying and doing the wrong thing. So once we finished that, we then created our what we call content wireframe. And we took that content wireframe and we engaged some subject matter experts from Canada and the UK to start to explore, okay, here's the stuff that we want to cover in the Compassionate Workplace campaign. How do we go about that? And then started to build that content. At the same time, we also had an advisory committee, and that was made up of mostly the participants in the focus groups who provided us with feedback around the content that was in the resources, and even just how things were displayed, and gave us a lot of that feedback and tips. And so the advisory committee consisted of business leaders, HR and labor representatives, and again, those employees who were also dealing with those experiences. And then the campaign moved on to be piloted. So the goals of the Compassionate Workplace campaign, really the goal of the campaign and the change we are working to support across Canada is to help create a compassionate work culture where within organizations where people feel supported, whether they are caregiving or grieving. Changing culture takes time. We know that with compassionate communities, and the case is the same here within workplaces. And that the campaign has been designed as a multi-year initiative that can be easily implemented in an organization. So it includes resources and tools to help with building awareness and understanding, right? And really here, what we're trying to do is increase everybody's awareness in the workplace of what it's like to be an employee who's also caregiving, an employee who's also grieving. So talking about their fears and some of the things that keep them awake at night. So really building that awareness. Decreasing the stigma. So helping employees understand the impact of caregiving, illness, and grief within the workplace. So again, what are some of the balancing acts that these employees may be dealing with? Raising awareness of resources and supports. Initially, when Pallium did the literature review, we thought the bulk of the campaign was going to be around this piece on raising awareness of resources and supports. And it still very much is a big piece because not everybody knows about things. For instance, even the CCB that Laurel was mentioning a minute ago, many people don't know it exists. They don't know how to access it. Leave of absence, people not knowing about leave of absence for grief or for caregiving. So we've ensured that those supports and resources are in here so people start to become aware of how to help themselves or how to help a colleague. And then promote and enable supportive conversations. So really, this is the piece that really came out in our focus groups. And I think that's a big part of culture change, is to be able to have that conversation sort of in-house. And the campaign has a lot of pieces in here to really support that. And it focuses on enabling conversations with managers, with employees who are dealing with these experiences, as well as helping colleagues to be able to engage in these conversations. Ultimately, empowering people to create a more compassionate culture and enable everybody within the workplace to engage in the support an employee that is impacted by caregiving and grief, the support that they need. This is one of the biggest societal and workplace challenges facing us today. After 15 years of hard work, it is finally becoming acceptable to talk about mental health in the workplace. We are only just starting to talk about compassion, caregiving, and grief. These are the next big challenges for workplace culture. All right, and a little overview of the campaign itself. So the good news is that the campaign can help you if you're a workplace who wants to look at strengthening your care culture. So participating organizations get access to a comprehensive suite of tools and resources as a part of their Compassionate Workplace campaign to support their efforts to drive that culture change. These resources have been developed by experts, as you heard earlier, and are based on research and existing best practices. We know from existing research that in order to create that culture change, everyone needs to be engaged and involved, and these resources have been developed to support different roles within the organization. And that is done, we have achieved that through 30 resources and tools that are included within this campaign. And there's stuff in here for senior management, team leads, managers, champions, colleagues, and the employee themselves. The resources that are included as a part of the campaign fall under 3 buckets, basically. So you've got your communication materials, which raise awareness and knowledge. And I'll just sort of share with you, one of the typical resources in this area would be, for instance, our stories. So what we did is we worked with the subject matter experts to create short little stories. They're about 300 words long on many different topics: caregiving and mental health, the need to have an advanced care plan, supporting a colleague who's returning to work after the loss of a parent. So just a variety of topics within these stories. But what we really wanted to achieve with the stories is that everybody started to get a bit of an insight to what the fears and challenges might be for that employee who's in a role like that. So really trying to increase everybody's understanding and awareness. And each of those stories as well include supportive resources. So again, really wanted to make sure we increase the awareness of the supportive resources that are out there. So what we've done is we've included the resources that complement that story. And so sharing that story within the workplace, people will start to learn, okay, I'm a caregiver. Oh, there's all these really great resources that I have access to. Or if you know someone who's caregiving. Another sort of bucket would be the activities, and the activities are really designed to decrease stigma related to serious illness, caregiving, and grief. And it's about starting that conversation within the workplace around, is there anyone in the workplace who's providing care at this moment, or who has provided care? And all of a sudden it starts to allow the workplace to see, oh, there's actually quite a few employees who are on that journey or who have been on that journey while in our workplace, as well as grief. There's an activity in there for grief, and it's the same sort of thing, asking, who do you grieve for? Who do you miss, right? And very quickly, you'll start to see a lot of employees are feeling grief while they're at work. And then the last bucket is tools. And there are a lot of tools here to just support the campaign, so the launch of the campaign, but then also there's some tools in here around good best practices. So around, for instance, workplace modification. If you have an employee, say, who wants to go on compassionate care leave, you know, so you can have a conversation with them, that in this tool will guide you through that conversation. So what we've noticed and have heard is that managers feel more confident to sit down and have that meeting, because the tool just sort of guides them through the things that they want to cover, including, for instance, stuff that you know, isn't necessarily tangible, like how long are you going to be away and who do you think can help out with your workload, but also covering things that aren't tangible but show the employee, wow, my workplace really cares about my health, right? So it's got the practical stuff in there, but it's got the emotional stuff as well. So how can you engage in the compassionate workplace campaign? And so there's two approaches that we've experienced with workplaces. So there's one where they can run it as a standalone campaign, and that's what it's designed. It's designed to be run in-house, standalone, doesn't require you know, necessarily anybody coming in and hosting things. Or we fully appreciate a lot of workplaces are doing some really great stuff around their wellness programming. Maybe they have a mandate at this moment that they need to stay focused on, but they see the value of starting to have this conversation. And so you can integrate within the wellness program that you maybe already have set out for the next X amount of years. So there are two approaches here that you can use. And I think it's important to mention that, you know, Pallium is here to help with that planning process and implementation support. Sort of just like Laurel mentioned, like we're here to help you guys with creating that care culture, right? And then last piece was just really, if you want to learn more or you want to start building your care culture today, please visit compassionateworkplace.ca to learn more about Pallium's Compassionate Workplace campaign. Okay, so we're going to move over to the question and answer discussion part of the webinar. So if you have any questions that you want to ask us, ideally, we would love it if you could put it in the Q&A. But if not, you can also put it in the chat as well. And Laurel and we have some support online right now. So we will work together to answer those questions. All right, so it seems like everybody's maybe a little shy. Laurel, did you have a question to maybe get us going?
No, I was going to just say that was there's a bit of a compliment that just came in, Bonnie, from Yvonne Heath. She's author of Love Your Life to Death and the founder of the I Just Showed Up or Just Show Up programs. I'm sorry, Yvonne. She says this is one of the greatest initiatives ever. So that means a lot coming from someone such as Yvonne Heath, who's an expert in grief and bereavement. But it's certainly one of the areas where we feel strongly and passionately about it. It's the right thing to do, especially as we wiggle our way out of COVID. And I say wiggle because it's tight. All these little twists and turns, we're trying to wiggle our way out of it and keeping everybody safe and healthy. So at the same time. So thank you for that, Nicole. How can we best support and share this? I think this is part of this is it's really a grassroots movement. Here in Ottawa, actually, this morning I had the humbling and a great honor to attend City Hall in our nation's capital. Bonnie, it was unfortunate that you were not able to be in attendance as well. But with Compassionate Ottawa, our Champions Council was there, but we received a beautiful proclamation from the Mayor of Ottawa proclaiming this city as participating in World Compassionate Communities Day. And I think just talk to your fellow coworkers. If you're not, if you happen to be someone who's in the lead of an organization, give great consideration to moving in this vein. because I really think it's part of how or how we're going to find successes in how we come out of COVID. And I really didn't want to mention COVID today because this is not about COVID. This is about how we care for each other. It's about compassion and it's about human kindness. And we could all benefit from a bit more of that these days. So talk about it. Talk about what's important to you, what matters. And I did want to mention too, and this may spur a couple of things, and I noticed we got a couple of questions coming in, is that this isn't just about those who are off providing care. I wanted to mention for those who, maybe have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but they maybe have 2 or 3 years still or more. And I'm going to share personal experience. 2008, I was diagnosed with a terminal illness and told I had a 20% chance of a 5-year survival. That was 14 years ago, almost 15. But I didn't want to stop working. Why would I want to give up the one thing that I could get out of the house away from the 3 kids and my family life? Because it was the only thing that I really had that was mine. But the questions go through your head. Like, if I take time off for my cancer treatment, how am I going to be received when I come back? Am I still going to have my job? Am I still going to have opportunity for promotion? It really it can cause moral distress on the individual who may need to take time off for themselves. So there's still a lot of, like, one of my favorite expressions is there's a lot of game to be played here. There's a lot of game to be played here with this compassionate care benefit and the leadership of our federal government to help forge the way. And in partnership with Pallium, we're really trying to do what's right for the benefit of all of our fellow human beings and citizens in this country and abroad. Who knows? Yeah. Who knows? But it's the right thing to do.
I just want to jump on before maybe we start answering some questions, because everybody's asking questions, which is great. Just sort of on the thought of that personal story you just shared. And I think the flip side of that as well is that sometimes within workplaces, employees will assume that you should be at home because you're sick, right? And so it's really important to create that awareness, address that stigma around it, and so that people understand, actually, this is good for Laurel's health to be back at work, right? And so, having her stay at home for X amount of months, it would actually be a detriment to her health and then be productive. So it's also important, and I think that's what, as a part of care culture, is sort of peeling the layers away around that and understanding that there are benefits for someone who's caregiving, grieving, or dealing with that serious illness to be at work. It is contributing to their health, right? So I just felt like that was sort of an important piece to understand from the workplace perspective. How about we answer the questions in the question and answer, and then I see that there's a couple in the chat. So Maria Rugg has said in the Q&A, do you have any consultants that can provide support to organizations wanting to evaluate their readiness of CCC? Laurel, I think that's over to you.
Yes, so I have a designated team member, Kelly McLaren, who it is her job, and she's been on board with this program right from the very inception, working with our Champions Council on it since 2016. So it's Kelly, I'll put her email in the chat room for you, Maria, and feel free to reach out to either her or myself and we can help get you started. But no, we do not have consultants that we hire to provide support to organizations. It's not that complicated. We don't need to have consultants do it. It's pretty streamlined. We got it down pat.
And I'll just jump on and say, Pallium and CHPCA, we are having conversations because we see how our work is complementary to each other. And so the Compassionate Workplace campaign maybe could be a part of that readiness piece as well.
Absolutely.
All right, next question. What can I do if it seems like my employer doesn't support the needs of my colleagues for their time to process grief through life change? Oof, that is definitely a barrier. We know that one for sure. Laurel, do you want to start with this one?
I would suggest by directing them to some of the resources that are available to make them a more inclusive employer in the year 2021 and moving forward, because if they don't get on board, they're going to be left behind, and that's going to have a negative impact on their employees. So I would suggest that don't be afraid to prompt them to checking out some resources or actually going to our website, copying and pasting the links, and maybe emailing your supervisors, managers, directors, etc. to say, hey, have we thought about this from an HR perspective? Or, at any opportunity during performance evaluation, say, hey, here, I have a suggestion. Or there's got to be some kind of modality maybe within your organization. And if there's not, we'd be happy to make some suggestions of how you can bring up these often difficult but essential conversations to be having.
Yeah, and I would just basically build on that by saying, become that champion. Obviously, you're passionate about this, and often, culture change happens by a couple of champions who band together, right? And so become a champion. See if you can find anybody else within the workplace who also supports these views, and collaborate together to sort of drive that change.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that as well, Bonnie, that now, during, probably more importantly than during any other time during our respective careers, it couldn't be more critical than now to have support and show support for your fellow comrades, like for your colleagues, that, it's how we take care of each other that really matters at the end of the day. And an employer doesn't want to be on board with that. I'm not so sure I'd want to hang around. No, often we don't have choices, but it certainly doesn't hurt. The squeaking wheel gets the grease, but it can be it can be done politely and appropriately. And we're here to help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just in the spirit of World Compassionate Communities Day, the idea that one person can create a lot of action, right? So a lot of the compassionate community initiatives going on around the world is because one or two like-minded people got together and wanted to drive change. So you may feel like the only person in your workplace right now who sees the value in this, but just start having those conversations, plant the seeds. You can do a lot. It's really amazing.
It reminds me of a quote, and I'm apologize that I don't have the name of the person or who came up with it, was that, individually, often we feel helpless. And that, acknowledge that we can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone. We have the power to do so. So as we mentioned early on, that this is everybody's business, it's everybody's responsibility, and it's up to us to help promote this kind of systemic change in the workplace.
All right, on to our next question. Is there any way to make the general public aware of this initiative, as there could be more support and kudos to compassionate companies? Laura, do you want to take that first?
Sure. We work, and with a very limited budget as a not-for-profit charitable organization that represents the hospices across the country through our provincial associations. The challenge is great to spread the word, but we do our best through our social media channels, and we're looking for opportunities all the time. So if you have any suggestions on helping to make the general public more aware of this initiative, we certainly welcome it. But it's slow and steady wins the race, I guess, as you say. But this only started in 2016, and things take time, but we're working on it.
Yeah, and just to sort of add to that, I think for sure the more, we're hosting this webinar, in recognition of World Homecom Day, but also just to increase the awareness of the need for this, right? And so, the more people that can get involved and spread the awareness, the resources, you are going to receive a recording of this webinar. So use that, right? Make that your tool. And as well, I would say compassionate communities themselves often are thinking or trying to engage workplaces as well. So this conversation is happening at many different levels within Canada, but by all means, please be a champion. We will take anyone who can help. Next question from Brian. Any advice on how this kind of program could be replicated in other countries like the US, where there is no federal support or mandate for this kind of thing? Is that a necessary ingredient? Thank you for sharing your great work. Laurel, did you want to start?
I can start by, and I won't forget, I'll take a note to put my email in the chat. So Brian Castle asked that question. So I do have the honor of being the Canadian delegate on the World Hospice Palliative Care Association. I can reach out to my counterpart, Ido Bannock in the United States, and see what we could do to maybe partnership on expanding it there, or having it segue nicely into their programs. But do reach out, Brian, and I'll put you in touch with Ido, and we can go from there. I'm assuming that you're from the US participating today, but I'll just pop into the chat to put that in there.
I'm just going to add on to that. So first to say, hi, Brian, it's nice to see you. So Brian actually was great and trekked up from the US to attend the 2019 Public Health Palliative Care Conference, Laurel, that CHPCA and Pallium and a few other partners had co-hosted. So it's great to see you on here. Yeah, you know, I think the other thing, if you're not aware of this, Brian, is of the Elevate Compassion group in the US, who's really starting to have a strong presence. And they are focused on, you know, starting to create a platform for collaboration and building on compassionate communities. So if you haven't reached out to them or connected in with them, I would encourage you to do that. And, you know, I did sales for 20 years. So my sales brain says you've just got to find those opportunities to draw the connection, right? And work with that. So absolutely. Public Health Palliative Care International, you know, certainly they're really increasing and highlighting the awareness of compassionate communities, and then the role of workplaces around the world. So hopefully some of that will be able to support you, and by all means, stay in touch. All right, the next question. Would working apart after COVID influence the culture of compassion? Laurel, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any going back to what used to be normal. This is going to be part of our future. And I do personally believe, I don't come to the table with a clinical background, but that with an MBA and my CHE, my Certified Health Executive from the Canadian College of Health Leaders, is that employees are going to have to shift their policies to meet the needs of their employees. Employers are going to have to shift their own cultural beliefs to meet the needs of people today, because throughout the past 18 months, many of us, and predominantly, I have to say, usually it's the females who are the ones who give up or put aside their own career needs and their jobs to provide care within the home, or otherwise when the family's in need, or their local community. I think it's just, there is no going back, and we are going to have to shift how we shape our policies future thinking toward that end of a culture of compassion, a culture of caring for each other. Do you have anything to add to that, Bonnie?
Yeah,
I don't see there's any going back. It's
absolutely,
it's all upward from here when it comes to support and trust and safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, my sort of sales brain says this is an opportunity, right? Because many workplaces have been required to make the shift and have worked towards engaging their employees over the last while working remotely. And so I think, you know, it almost will open the door a little bit for this conversation and workplace modifications and things like that around the culture of compassion. So, you know, I think there actually are potentially some opportunities that would support the having the conversation about care culture here. So that's the end of the question and answer questions that were posted, but I do believe there were some posted in the chat. So I'm just going to sort of scroll through. So we had a question, how do we reach out to you guys after the webinar? So Laurel and I know put our contact information in there. And again, you will be receiving a copy of this webinar. You'll get an electronic copy. Let's see what else is in here for questions. So Janelle says, I think that as an employer, we have the responsibility to understand that people grieve differently. Absolutely. What and who they grieve for is also different. Absolutely. It's not about what we think it is right away. It's about having empathy for the people who work with us and what their experience is. It's not a question, but I think that's a bang on statement. Let's see if there's any other ones in here.
Grief and loss is a universal, natural human response, but we all grieve uniquely and differently. And it's how to recognize when someone needs a little leg up, or, you know, that, how are you doing? And we often just, we aren't born with that skill set to understand and recognize human responses, especially during grief, because we're too afraid to say the wrong thing, or, you know, and this is where we can come in to help with some of those issues.
There's a question here about, is there a cost to the kit? So I'm not quite sure if you are referring to the Compassionate Workplace campaign, but I will say that there is a participation fee that does exist to access the Compassionate Workplace campaign, and to ensure that it wouldn't become a barrier. You know, what we've done is it's sort of on a sliding scale so that even small workplaces will be able to engage with the campaign. And Laurel, I think maybe just
exactly. You know, our model is going under a bit of a shift, but depending upon whether, you know, you're a small not-for-profit or a local hospice, or you know, a huge conglomerate with, you know, millions and millions of dollars to share with your shareholders, it's going to be varied. So yeah, so again, it's like a sliding scale. But we're here to work with you, so it's not that nobody's been denied. Yeah, put it that way.
Any other questions that you guys might have? I actually have one that I'd like to throw out and sort of see what the responses are in the chat. So I would love if you could just type yes in the chat if you know of someone who is working and also a caregiver. So just type yes in the chat. What I'd like to see is just how many yeses we actually get. Woo! Just as I thought, it was taken off. Wow, how quickly we were able to answer yes. You know, so just sort of trying to speak to, I know we've talked a lot of it today about statistics and, you know, the right thing to do almost, but really there are a lot of people who are employees and are also in those caregiving roles. And so, you know, how can we help support them? How can we help them not stay up at night worrying about all their fears, right? So thank you for answering that one. I have another question, if that's okay. Another one would be, we just sort of want to get your thoughts around what are some of the barriers that a workplace may feel exist to engaging in this type of content? So what do you think? What do you think some of the reasons why workplaces would say they don't want to participate? So we got fear as one of the potential barriers. Gets too messy. I've heard that. I'm sure you have as well, Laurel. Personal issues, yep. Feeling too intrusive, touchy subject. We are a society that prefers to ignore grief. I think unfortunately that's true, but I think the pandemic has forced us to change that approach a little bit, wouldn't you say, Laurel?
Absolutely. Touchy subject, and that's part of our culture here is that, it's a family matter. It's something that's outside of the workplace, but we spend and invest so much of our time in our workspaces. It's like our second families. And, I think it's going to be the employers who choose to deny that this is becoming a greater issue in their workplace are the ones who are going to be left behind and not be the employers of choice. It's going to make, for those who do embrace this cultural change of compassion and empathy within the workplace are the ones who are going to create a greater competitive edge of being an employer of choice. And we all can see what's happening with, we can't find good help, and I wish we could be open longer, but we don't have the employees right now, and the shortage of skilled people to do the jobs. We can't live in a denial that the landscape has changed in the workplace, and it's changed. I dare I say, if I had a crystal ball, which I don't, but we're not going back. This is very forward thinking. And I'm willing to embrace it and step out on a limb that this is where we're headed. Is we've got to do a better job at showing humanity and compassion for each other moving forward, and the onus is going to be on employers to take a leadership role in that and step up to the plate to be there for their most valuable asset, their people. And we are people, we're all people. But those of us in the position of leadership also have to be the ones to, be the example to our employees. And, when I took some time off in May and I just said, folks, I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I need to take some time to just pump the brakes a little bit and recharge my batteries. And if you don't show that as the leaders of these organizations as well, it reflects poorly on you. So you have to be the change that you want and live up to those values, while we respect that everybody, goes through tough times, and your employer should be there right beside you to the best of their abilities, particularly when there's Canadian compassionate benefit in place. And, to press our government to do better, to do more, to help those who are employers support their employees, their team members.
Absolutely. We actually have two questions that popped into the Q&A piece. So first question is there a list of companies that have received the CC designation?
Absolutely. You can check it out. I know my poster behind me has our previous email, our website on it, chpca.net, but chpca.net or chpca.ca. And you can go on the website and actually see the companies that are on the roster. I believe we're up to 19 companies so far and growing with applications coming in.
Awesome. Another question is, as a palliative care nurse at a local hospice, how do you suggest I bring this compassionate workplace forward to them? We support death daily, along with families grieving, along with our staff dealing with personal loss and death. So Laurel, I'll let you take that part.
Oh my goodness. Tell them to reach out, encourage the local hospice to reach out to the provincial association. And if they're comfortable to reach out to us directly, we do have individual hospices from various provinces that do have the designation already, and we're here to help.
Yeah, and I would just sort of share a little bit around the evaluation that we do with workplaces once they engage with our Compassionate Workplace campaign. And one of the pieces that was interesting but not surprising was that workplaces themselves who supported customers, which you are doing basically in a hospice setting, the staff felt more comfortable supporting those customers after having those conversations and doing that internal work within the workplace. And so, I think we often think about compassionate workplace just within the context of the employer and employees, but the reality is that this work and this culture change has legs that will expand out into supporting the community, but then also if you're a workplace that has customers, also better supporting those customers and, being more confident to engage in that conversation and really, talk about sorry for your loss or things like that. So, I think that's another avenue when sort of proposing this sort of work to an employer is the impact it can have more broadly than just the workplace itself.
And see, here's an example of compassion. My stepchildren just came home from school and they were away for Halloween. This is a sign of compassion. It's 3 o'clock and she just brought me a little Mr. Big Bar. She thought maybe I might need a little pickup. So thank you for that example of compassion, Robin.
Okay, do we have any more questions or any sort of thoughts, or do you want to pick our brains a little more around, starting the conversation in your workplace? Now is the time to sort of pick our brain and everybody can hear. Laurel, did you have any questions? I was just going to say, do you have any questions you might want to throw out there?
A very wise person said to me one time, they may or may not be on this call still, or this webinar, was that, don't get hung up on saying the wrong thing. Just say something. Just be there. Just show that you care. I know times, because we never really know what is that right thing to say to someone. Whether they've been ill, someone they care about is gone, or just been diagnosed. We don't have a book or an Emily Post to tell us or to teach us how to respond to someone who's grieving. This is all very new to us culturally. So I think the most important thing is to don't be shy. Don't be afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing, because chances are the person just wants to know that there's someone there. The individual just needs to feel like they're not alone or that they're in isolation. So don't be afraid to say, I understand you've been through a really difficult time, but, how are you doing? I'd like to be able to be there for you. Reach out, just as someone, very wise, Yvonne Heath says this, just show up, just be present. You don't even have to say anything. A look sometimes can be enough to communicate, or the body language, to just let someone know that they're not suffering alone and that they don't need to. It's good for their mental health and it's good for your mental health. Especially, if you get, your chances are you're not going to get a negative response. It'll be met with welcomed open arms. And it's like,
I was just going to sort of add to that, saying, we're all pretty supportive of each other here. If you haven't picked up on that, I would say, I learned about that idea of just showing up from Yvonne, who I know who was on here and may still be. And it's that idea that sometimes it's just sitting there. Like you don't necessarily have to say something, right? And that's sort of, certainly what we talk about with our resources. Sometimes it's just showing up, which can have a large impact. We have another question that just came in on the question and answer. So, is there a support for employers that are new to this thinking and maybe have a situation of grief happening that they find difficult to handle?
That's a great question. You got to start somewhere. So thank you. Kudos to you that it's on your radar and that you're thinking in these terms. And this is a great place to start. There are a number of experts who deal specifically with the grief and the grieving process. There are also a number of opportunities to have employee assistance programs put in place, or through extended benefits or insurance programs if there isn't one in place. Finding out what resources might be available in your community based on your postal code to be able to offer to the individual, even if it's outside of the construct of your company or business. And this is part of that connection to compassionate communities, is there's lots of help out there. It's a matter of trying to navigate it. And it's sad but true that it can often be hard to navigate the programs that exist because there is fragmentation across the country in how we deliver service delivery around grief and bereavement. And that's one of the most beautiful things about a palliative approach to care and what we advocate as a human rights issue, that everyone should have access to quality palliative care because it includes the grief and bereavement piece as well, the before, during, and after the loss. So it's kind of like it's a very interdisciplinary, multifaceted approach to care.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, certainly, you know, to toot Compassionate Workplaces horn, we do have a lot of that stuff. We've included that in there because, again, we knew often people weren't aware of that information, but you know, I think a really great resource could be mygrief.ca, which is an excellent resource that exists out there. But absolutely, you know, reach out and we can help as well. Okay, don't see any others. Did you have a question that you might want to throw out there, Laurel, or?
No, I was gonna, when we were talking earlier about the barriers to the workplace, I think a lot of people who, and this is part of that cultural shift and change that I want to see, is there's a lot of apprehension, I think. People are just so afraid. And like, if I need to take the time off that I do to get my mental health in check as I go through this grieving process, am I still going to have a job? Are they going to find another job for me when I'm ready to come back and it won't be the same position? Will I be looked down? So I think there's a lot of apprehension around cultural safety when employees who are struggling maybe and need additional help, that they feel apprehension out of fear because they don't have a supportive employer. And I think that landscape is going to have to change in the future to come.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, and I think it's power in numbers, right? And so the more of us that talk about this, the more of us that are champions, you know, we'll be able to drive that culture change. It's going to take time, and we know that, but we just, you know, we have to keep working together to do that. Yes, Serena Lewis, that is a very great comment about the ability to transform Canadian labor and caregiving needs. Absolutely. Okay, well, I think I'm going to move on to the last couple of slides just to start. Oh, someone's raised their hand, I believe. Maybe it was raising the hand by accident because I think it's gone now. So I'm just going to move on to the last couple of slides to wrap things up. So thank you, everybody. That was a very engaging question period. I know sometimes it can be pretty silent, so thank you for that. So just a bit of a wrap up, you know, you will receive a feedback survey after the session, so please fill that out. It's a part of the Palliative Care ECHO Project, so we really, really encourage you to participate in that. And just a reminder that a recording of this session will be emailed to you within the next week. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for attending the webinar and being willing to engage in this content. We know it still is a bit taboo. Thank you to Laurel for participating with us on this webinar from Canadian Hospice Palliative Care. And we're really excited to be doing this on the World Compassionate Communities Day. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks,